There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Light and dark. These are the central symbols of the Advent, Christmas, Epiphany cycle, the first 3 seasons of the church year. During the 4 weeks of Advent, the symbol is that the light of Christ is nearby, even in the darkness. We may not see it yet, or we may only see a glimmer, but it is there. The light is near. During the 12 days of the Christmas season, which begin on Christmas Eve, the symbol is that the light of Christ has broken into the world decisively, and because of this decisive breaking in, a new age has begun. A new way of living in the world has been initiated. During the days of the Epiphany season, which begin on the eve of the Epiphany, January 6th, so it begins on January 5th, actually, at sunset, and extends to the eve of Ash Wednesday. The symbol is that the light of Christ will and does come again and again and again and again. Now and then, the message of Epiphany says, now and then this light glimmers as we and others let it shine through us. And someday, this light will come in its fullness, as only God knows it. One aside, you may have noticed that these seasons all seem to begin on the eve of a day, of the particular day we mark. That's because church time follows the ancient Jewish way of keeping time, the custom of marking the day as beginning at sunset and ending at sunset. So, for example, today at sunset, Monday begins, and it ends at sunset on what we call Monday. It's different than our secular custom of marking a day from dawn to dawn. And it's a good reminder of the important role that darkness plays in the symbol of light and dark. And given our fondness for sunsets, usually, it's also a good reminder that darkness is not always a symbol of something bad. As the renowned preacher, the Reverend Dr. Barbara Browne Taylor reminds us, in the Old Testament world of biblical times, it was at night that God gave Abraham the vision of being the father of many nations as he focused Abraham's attention on the dark night sky and the stars that twinkled in the darkness. And it was at night that Jacob's dream of a ladder to heaven gave him hope, as well as at night that Jacob struggled with God and was renamed and blessed. We're told in the book of Exodus that God led the people of Israel through the wilderness with a cloud by day and a fire by night. We're so used to hearing that, we just skip right over it. A fire by night, God led them through the wilderness. It shows that night wasn't a time for them to all go hide in their tents with the flap closed, as if they were afraid of the darkness. But instead, night was a time, simply a time, when they needed to be led by light. They needed to be led in the day as well. But in the light of day, the light of a fire would not have stood out quite so much. And this is our problem, of course. We have so much light in our world, artificial light in our world, that we've lost contact with what Barbara Browne Taylor calls the treasures of night. As she noted in her recent lectures at the Episcopal Seminary in Swanee, Tennessee, with all of our technology and all of the different ways we can provide artificial light, we have lit the night. We have lit the night so that we don't have to be bothered by its darkness anymore. Of course, as she points out, such lighting of the night has caused magnificent elements of God's creation to simply disappear from our view. The Milky Way. You can't see the Milky Way for all the light. And unless we leave our computer room as the midnight hour increases to go to our car to get something we've forgotten, we may not even notice the light of the moon because we're too busy with the artificial lights in our computer rooms. You know, it's true. The night sky looks very different when you take a ride out in the country at night rather than looking up from your own patio in town. In the country, especially in the remote parts of the countryside where there are no lights, God's lights sparkle in the sky, and it's plenty of light. In the days of the Old and New Testaments, and for many years of Christian tradition, the symbol of dark still had a very powerful meaning. That meaning was not always something scary, but rather simply something in which even a small speck of light could stand out. Even a small speck of light in deep darkness can serve as a guide. Because in the dark, you can tell better where the light is coming from. In our time, there are so many lights that we often lose the ability to distinguish one from another. Take this Advent wreath, for example. The symbol is that in the darkness, one light is lit, creating a small glimmer of light, and then two, a little more light, and then three, a little more light, and then four, a little more light, until all in the Christ candle are lit and there is a burst of light. But we can't see that. We can't see that with all the light in the room. We know we're supposed to think it, but there's light from the chandeliers and light from the spotlights and light from the windows. We hardly would notice the lights on the candles if we didn't draw attention to them at the beginning of the service. You see, it's a simple truth. A single light is seen much better in the darkness than in the midst of multitudes of artificial light. And that is true not only literally, it's true figuratively, metaphorically as well. If we take darkness, say, as a symbol for those times when it's hard to see where we're going in our lives, for those times when life around us seems to begin to take on an unfamiliar shape, those times when we seem to be stumbling over objects that we didn't know before would be in our way. If we take darkness as a symbol for those times, then what we probably want most right then is for somebody, anybody, to turn on all the lights, not just a little pin light, flashlight, not just one candle. We want all the lights so that we will have complete clarity, so that we will know. When life seems confusing, it's like walking in the dark. And it doesn't really matter to most of us when we're walking, stumbling around in the dark places of our life, where the semblance of clarity comes from. We just want to get out of the dark, and we'll grab whatever comes along. So it is that sometimes for all of us, the only light we see in the darkness is the artificial light that promises escape. Whether that's the total escape of hurting ourselves or someone else, or the seemingly more benign escape of just ignoring whatever the problem is and figuring somebody else will have to fix it. But there's another way. And part of this other way is what Taylor refers to as becoming endarkened before we can become enlightened. What an image that is. That we somehow have to become endarkened, get used to the treasures of the dark, before we can really see the light of God among all of the other artificial lights that promise us escape. I'd like to tell you what that means to me. Because I do, on occasion, find myself getting up at night and walking through the house in the dark. Usually it's because I've gone to bed and realized I've left my cell phone in the living room and one of you might call with an emergency. And I wander through the house without turning on the lights and find my cell phone. But last night I decided, in preparation for this Sunday, I would actually wander through the house in the dark purposefully. And so I did. I turned out all the lights. I turned off the gas fireplace. I shut all the window shades. And I began to walk from room to room in the house in the dark without rushing to turn on a light. And here are 3 things that I noticed about walking in the dark. First, I was aware that I had to slow down. I couldn't just go barreling through the house in the dark with my mind on something else. And somehow I knew that. I didn't have to try it first to figure that out. I knew in the dark that I had to slow down. Secondly, I noticed that even though I couldn't see where everything was, I was paying closer attention to where I thought I remembered the furniture being. And even when I was mistaken and bumped into a table, I was moving slowly enough so that it was just a gentle bump, just enough to correct my course. Third, I became aware of little bits of light that I had never noticed before. There was light seeping out from the edges of the blinds, where even though that shut out the light from outside, just little edges of light seeped through. I discovered that the dial on my CD player is illuminated. And I could tell where that corner of the room was because of that illuminated dial, just a very soft glow. There was still a faint glow in the fireplace from where the fire had been. None of these were enough to provide absolute clarity in the room, not one of them. But they did serve as guides, a light in the dark. And I was very aware of where each pinpoint of that light was coming from. I was aware because there wasn't too much light. I could see the light because I was walking slowly and purposefully in the dark. The Advent season is about both light and dark. It's a good time to remember that the darkness of not knowing is something to be explored rather than something to be afraid of. It's a good time to let our not knowing endarken us in a good way, in a way that reminds us to slow down, in a way that leads us to pay closer attention to parts of our lives that we don't often even think about being there, in a way that makes small points of light even more obvious. Because always, coming into the darkness is the light of Christ. This Advent, may we allow ourselves to linger long enough in the darkness that we might see the light. Amen.